Greetings. Today I would like to do a quick video about using the new Dante Bluetooth Wallplate from Radio Design Labs, or RDL for short, along with an Allen Heath IP1 Controller to create a self-service zone on an Allen Heath AHM matrix processor that you might use in a gym or an event room, etc. The idea here is that a user can walk up, pair their phone to or tablet to the RDL, and then use the IP1 to select this input and be able to play their own music. So a gym instructor, so forth, or in a conference room, might be a laptop even. They can provide their own music, and then by clicking and rotating, you'd also have access to a couple of house venue channels, so background music type channels, Muzak, and also an announcer channel override. And so we're going to set that up, or it's already set up. We're going to go through how it's set up, talk about it. It's the TLDR up front is that so far in my testing, this has been working excellently, even with the unit in a metal housing at the moment. Of course, Bluetooth 2.4 gigahertz, your mileage may vary, depends on what all the ambient radio or RF is in the area that you're using, but that's probably going to affect any Bluetooth device similarly. So we will take a look at these. We will look at the RDL control console on the computer just to see what you can configure for this device. And then we will look at the config in AHM Systems Manager for how it's actually set up. Now, this is obviously something that is meant for an installed configuration. And before anybody goes, why isn't it in a wall? Well, for me, I am testing it here at home. This is not the final deployment of it. And this little box was a lot more convenient for testing than trying to put it in a wall somewhere. And it also makes it a bit more convenient for doing this video as well. I just wanted to get that out of the way in case somebody was going to comment saying, why isn't it in a wall? I will state that the IP1 does get a little warm, so you probably want to make sure you've got enough ambient air space in the wall for it, or use a metal wall box instead of a plastic one. It's not super warm, but it is definitely gives off a little bit of heat, whereas the RDL prides themselves on this is almost no heat whatsoever. To get it out of the way as well, both of these devices are PoE powered. Neither of them has a pass-through, so you will note that I've got two Ethernets coming in. So when you're doing your design planning with the general contractor for the installation, you need to make sure that not only are they providing you with a dual gang, or possibly three if you're going to add other components, but also that each of these devices needs its own Ethernet ran to it, and you will need the switch ports for it back in your IDF. So with that out of the way, let's take a closer look at these devices. So here we have the little tabletop box that I'm using to mount these for testing purposes. The RDL has status light. Obviously the green is, hey, I'm connected to the Dante network, and I've got, power, and I'm connected to the Dante network, and sync is good. There's a little blue light here for the Bluetooth status as well. And then on the IP1, the IP1's been around for quite a while. So you've got the zone name. I haven't actually, testing is still just zone 9. And then you have the input select. So if I press in, I can spin the dial and pick, trying to do this without blocking the screen, pick one of the 3 zones that I have set up as part of the input select. We'll get to that in the AHM config later. Select it, and then spinning the dial without first clicking for zone select controls the volume of the output zone. If we look inside, the IP1 has no backplate to it, and like I say, it does generate a bit of heat. The RDL is in a solid metal enclosure and does not generate any heat to speak of. By the way, this little desktop thing is also an RDL product. So pairing for the Bluetooth is very simple. You have to hold the button for 5 seconds until the blue light starts blinking. I do wish that would have been slightly quicker, because I think some of your average non-techie people might not necessarily want to wait that long. And so if I bring my phone in here, we can see here's this Bluetooth Wallplate 001. That's what I named it. And so I'm going to pair. Now it's connected. And if we look at settings, we can see that it has detected AAC. This Bluetooth module from RDL does Bluetooth version 5, and it does AAC for advanced codecs, but it does not do anything else like aptX or LDAC or anything like that. AAC is really all you get with Apple devices. It's their preferred codec for Bluetooth, so works very well for Apple. For Android, while it is true that aptX generally gives better quality, the AAC, as long as you have Android version 14 or higher, generally works pretty well these days as well. So should not be an issue with Android phones either. And then obviously it also does SBC, because that's mandatory for all Bluetooth audio devices. The RDL is actually a bidirectional device, so you can send two Bluetooth channels to it, which it would then deliver to the phone. So if you wanted to do something like a conferencing system where you wanted to be able to send the room mics into a mobile device, you can do that. In this configuration here that I'm showing, however, I am only using it as an input. So if I then go back and where is it here? So here I have a little utility that will send tone, and you can see in the IP1 that it now shows a signal level. If I hit sound off, the signal bar on the right of the volume meter went away. Turn the sound back on, and the signal bar comes back. And I will stop this. So with that out of the way, let's take a quick look at the configuration software for the device. Okay, here we are looking at the RDL console, but real quick, just before that, this is the switch that these two devices are connected to. The port we are currently looking at is the IP1. You can see that it requests 16 watts PoE, but it only really uses about 2 watts. And it is 100 megabit. And then this port here is the BTN21, the RDL Bluetooth adapter. It actually is smart about how much power it requests. It says I only need 4 watts, so it's more friendly to your overall power budget by requesting what it actually needs. And it is using 1.1 watts, and that is with Bluetooth still connected to my mobile, so it should be in effect the full power requirement. You can see that it's sending a little over 3 meg, 3.5 meg. That's because it is sending 2 Bluetooth channels, the 2 Dante channels out over the network to the AHM. And then, like I say, it's also a 100 megabit port. So the RDL console, this is version 20179. This is current as of this recording. Do make sure you update, because this Bluetooth module is actually quite new. It's only been out a couple of months. And if we pull up the config for the Bluetooth module, we can see its device name. Now this is the Dante device name, so you configure it from the Dante controller, not from here. You can see the model, D, it's a single D because it's a single gang Decora style button. BTN21 is the Bluetooth network, for network being Dante 21. Version 0077. This is the most current version of the firmware for the device as of this recording. It is getting its IP via DHCP. Because this is an Ultimo, technically an Ultimo X2 device, all communications are from this one IP. It does not use a separate IP for communications or control from the device. Instead, it makes use of the Dante SDK for sending controls. If we pull up this inspector, we can actually send raw controls. And if we click on things in the interface, you can see all of the communications going back and forth to the device, which is handy for debugging. So the device allows you to set attenuation on what it sends to the network. So this is Bluetooth going out to the network. You can do it both for left and right if you want, or more likely you're going to do them in the same, because Bluetooth from one device is not going to generally have different levels for the different channels, but whatever. This is part of their sort of generic controls for any of their Dante devices, which might have independent audio, analog audio ins, for example. Media. You can see the device connected. You can force the wall plate into pairing mode instead of somebody pushing the button on the front. So we'll see in the config later, you can disable the button. So maybe you would, you might have IT staff that manually puts it into config mode for somebody if you don't want this in a totally public environment. You can force disconnect the Bluetooth device, and you can force link back to the last paired device. We'll get to link back in the config screen a little bit later. You can also see what's playing on the device, so track name and artist, and then you have media controls for next and stop, start, etc. You probably are not really going to be doing that from RDL console itself unless you're troubleshooting. This is part of their bigger ecosystem that allows you to configure, or they sell remote control boxes that you can also install as 1U gang devices. So if you want 3 gang, 4 gang, whatever, and so you could have buttons that let you play and remote control the phone from the wall plate, and they're making use of the same comms under the hood as these buttons. In configuration, so link back. What this does is it says if a device, the last device I was paired with, comes back in range, automatically reestablish Bluetooth. This is typical of things like your Bluetooth headphones, right? You turn them on and they automatically connect to your phone as a convenience instead of you having to manually go and force a connection every time. When you're deploying this in a public environment, so like I say, that the example of the gym training room where different fitness instructors come in and they want to pair their phone or their tablet to play their own music for their session, you probably don't want to enable link back. Instead, you want it to be that when they go out of range, they are forgotten, because then the next instructor that comes in, they're going to pair. You can do channel summing. So if your application is all mono, which, for example, that gym room, you probably are doing mono for the speakers because you're not going to have a sound stage in a gym room. You could choose to sum the Bluetooth channels together, and then both Dante channels will effectively be mirrors of each other coming out. And so you can pick either channel to route into whatever your processor is. Or if you've got the channels on your processor, don't sum them at the wall plate, and instead you get more flexibility and control with what you want to do in the processor. You can disable the button. So if you are, again, like I say, you're doing something where you're not really a public event, and so instead of that gym fitness room, maybe this is in a VIP's office, and you only want the VIP's phone to connect to it, or tablet to connect to it. You could disable the button and then make use of link back so that their device will connect and no other device will connect. You can set LED dim levels. You can set this BT pair timeout. So like I say, when you're in the public mode, if the instructor leaves and their phone goes out of range, and so now they're disconnected, after 30 seconds, as configured here, the wall plate will automatically clear the Bluetooth pairing and go back into unpaired mode, ready and waiting for the next instructor to come in and pair their device. And then finally, you can set a name for this wall plate. So if you've got, a yoga room and a weights room and whatever, right? You could name each of the wall plates in each of those rooms with a name that makes them easy to discover for your end users. You must use RDL, by the way, you must use RDL console to change these settings. There is no other way to do it. You cannot do it from Dante Controller. This Dante tab shows you if the wall plate is set as a subscriber of a Dante network, because you can actually do bidirectional. So you go back to that VIP office example, for example, you might want it to be that, say they've got a microphone and speakers and you want to do a mix minus setup so they can bring somebody in with video conferencing or a phone call on their phone or tablet. You need bidirectional comms to the device. It supports that, and it would show you what it was subscribed to here if it was subscribed. Now, in the use case of a public audio channel for a gym room or other event venue, probably you're not going to do that. You're going to be taking the audio from their device only and not sending them any audio. And then finally, you can do firmware updates from here. You have to get the firmware update file from RDL support. It's not directly on their website, but you would choose the file and then click update. It takes 5 or so minutes. It's not the fastest thing, but it does work. So that is a quick overview of the RDL Configuration Console when controlling the new D-BTN21 Bluetooth Dante Wallplate. Next, we will take a look at how this is set up, or how I've done this setup in AHM Systems Manager for the example of, say, of a public zone with a couple of house Muzak channels as options as well. Okay, Here we are looking at AHM Systems Manager, and I've got it open with dual windows so we can see both the input side and the zone output side. First, real quick, IP1 controller. The main is simply set to zone level, and the shift is set to zone select for the zone in zone 9, which is what I'm using as my test zone here. On the input, we have BT Wall 1, which is set up as stereo, and that is pulling in from Dante. And of course, in Dante Controller, it is set up to send the 2 Bluetooth Dante channels from the wall plate into the AHM on this stereo input channel. Additionally, we have paging channels, and this paging channel uses sort of my default mono voice channel, where there is a EQ set to roll off, low pass and high pass, just to get rid of mud that you don't typically need in a high pass or in a voice channel. There's a very minor compression as well, just to make sure somebody who's overly excited doesn't blow things out. And then that again routes through into zone 9, our output channel. And as you can see, I have just started up output to the Bluetooth wall plate from my phone. It is again playing should be the sine wave. Change it to square wave. And I'm doing that just for sample audio and not get copyright strikes. I then also have down here 2 Muzak channels, right? So this would be something feeding house music, not house in terms of the genre, but house in terms of the venue. Music, you might have a couple of different options. So you might have, a high energy one, again, if you're thinking about a gym room, and then you might have something more ambient for a second one, and you want your instructors to be able to choose one of them if they didn't bring their own device for music. And for that, I am just playing 2 different songs from the YouTube royalty-free library on loop, just so that we have something to demo with. Then over on the output side, we get a little bit more interesting, right? So we have our zone, it's set up as a stereo zone, and the output of that stereo zone is also going out Dante on the AHM, and it is going into the Scorpio, so it's recording the output of this zone directly into the Scorpio, independently of my voice recording. We have the selector, and that's what enables the device to do the audio selection. And I only have the wall plate and the 2 Muzak channels, and they are all set to basically be unity level when selected, right? This is all standard AHM stuff so far. I also have the paging channel as a priority input. So if I enable my paging input and talk into it, you should hear that the sine wave, or rather the square wave coming from the phone, just got heavily ducked. And now when I turn the input off, it goes back to full level. And the way that works is that in the routing page, that paging channel is set to unity gain all the time. And because it is not part of the selector options, when somebody chooses a different source on the selector, so I'll choose Music 1, you can see what happened is that Music 1 went to unity, and the other channels from the selector are set to negative infinity. If I choose the next music channel, again, you see now it went to Unity and these went blank. And then if I go back up to the wall plate, now it's at Unity, the others are muted. And then you can do whatever processing you want for the output. So you can add EQ to do for the room. You could, if you've got sort of a nice conference board room, you might have speaker processing going on. Again, in a gym room, it's probably just going to be sum to mono, but you can do whatever speaker processing with the AHM wants. And then on the output, you can say where to send it. And also, you know, I've turned on the limiter with basically a brick wall almost at max so that you don't send max out ever. And that is the configuration here. One thing I looked into was the AHM has on the unit these level sensing inputs. And the thought here was to set one of these up so that when the Bluetooth goes away, you could have it recall a preset, because one of the options in here is preset recall. And that preset recall would be set to only recall your output zone. You know, everything else is marked as a safe, so it won't change. So you could set that preset with the Muzak channel 1 as the input and maybe the volume level as, you know, down 8 dB, 6 dB, whatever, just so it's not blasting. And then the idea would be that when the level sense no longer detected anything coming from Bluetooth, that it would automatically activate that preset so that the room would go back to playing ambient music. The problem with that is that the hold time setting, if we tried to say, for example, 300 seconds, which would be 5 minutes, right? So somebody goes away for 5 minutes. Unfortunately, the max that you can set it to is 5 seconds, and that's not really enough. I mean, that 5 seconds wouldn't even be long. You know, to think of the typical person doing this, they're going to pair their phone, then they're going to go start trying to find the music, and they're not playing anything, and by the time they find the music they want to play and hit play, that 5 seconds is going to be up, and it will have already switched back to the house music. So that's not a very friendly experience to the users. So unfortunately, I had to give up on that idea. If anybody has any suggestions on how to accomplish that with an AHM, I'm all ears. So that was a quick first look at using the new single gang Bluetooth Wallplate receiver for Dante from Radio Design Labs in conjunction with an Allen Heath AHM system with an IP1 controller to control the output zone for a gym room, event room, whatever. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments down below. Thanks. Cheers.